My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. My hand trembled as I pulled the door shut, but it was too late. The image was already seared into my mind. I leaned back against the cool wood, gasping for air, telling myself it was an accident, that I shouldn't have looked. But I knew. I knew that vision would not leave me. Deep inside, a spark had ignited, a strange heat I had no idea how to extinguish. The rest of the day was lost to a fog of anxiety. I couldn't focus, couldn't settle. How could a man of his years, a man so much older, stir such a potent and forbidden excitement in me? It was a shudder of feeling I hadn't known in a long, long time. When I saw him later that evening, calmly brewing tea in the kitchen, I could barely meet his gaze. He acted as if nothing was different, but I felt the shift between us. I could no longer look him in the eye. That evening, I understood he was no longer just my tenant. From that moment in the hallway, he had become my secret, a secret pulsing deep within me, one that both terrified and thrilled me. The days that followed dragged by like thick molasses. I tried to slip back into the rhythm of my old life, but it was impossible. Every time I heard his footsteps in the hall, my body went rigid. Every morning, as he emerged from his room, his shadow stretching along the wall seemed larger, more substantial than before. The image from the bathroom, the one I fought so desperately to erase, returned again and again, a persistent, burning memory. It was an obsessive, unwanted melody playing on a loop in my head. Everything in the house felt different. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway, every corner seemed to hold an echo of what I had seen. My eyes began to catch details I'd never noticed before. The careful way he placed his cup on the saucer, the way his fingers, so large and strong, gripped the morning paper. His movements were precise, measured. There was no elderly fragility in them, only a deliberate, unhurried strength. I found myself watching him as he read, as he sat at the table. My silk robe, once just comfortable homeware, now felt like a fragile suit of armor. But it was a strange kind of protection. A part of me, a growing part, desperately wanted him to see through it. My curiosity, so innocent at first, had sharpened into obsession. I learned his routines. The sound of running water in the morning, the specific creak of the chair at his desk. They became signals, private reassurances that I was not alone. I would recall his silhouette against the clouds of steam, and a tremor would run through me. Not of fear, but of something new, something dangerously unfamiliar. I even found myself trying to imagine his scent, a mix of old paper and perhaps a subtle men's cologne, something warm and indefinable. One evening, standing under the hot spray of the shower, I realized my own movements had become slow, deliberate. As I ran the soap over my skin, every touch was a thought of him. With my eyes closed and water streaming down my face, I imagined his large hands on me, holding me with the same steady grace he held a book. The feeling was equal parts shame and thrill. I knew then that I could no longer fight it. The memory and my reaction to it had become a private game, and I was the only player. And so, I made a decision. It was impulsive, driven by a need that burned hotter each day. I left the bathroom door slightly ajar. The water poured from the shower head, and as I stepped into the billowing steam, the entire house seemed to hold its breath, waiting. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I washed my hair with painstaking slowness, letting my hands glide over my body, turning myself into pure, distilled anticipation. I was waiting for him. I knew he would hear the water. I knew he would notice the door, and so I waited. I soaped my breasts, my stomach, my legs, each movement a silent invitation. The scent of bergamot and mint from the shower gel filled the air, and I imagined it drifting out, down the hallway, finding him. And then I heard it, a faint creak of a floorboard, a single, restrained step. He was there. I could feel his presence just beyond the door, as if he were standing right in front of me. I held my breath, knowing he was watching, standing in the dim light of the hall. I didn't move. Instead, I let out a long, quiet sigh, a confession to the steam and the silence. I drew the soap over my arms, my neck, making every gesture intentional, inviting. It was a dangerous game I had started, and while a part of me was terrified he would walk away, a much larger part of me prayed he would stay, prayed he would stand right there, breathing in the quiet, while I showed him everything without saying a single word. When I finally turned off the water, I stood motionless, letting the droplets trace paths down my skin. He was still there. I could feel it, and in that heavy, charged silence, I knew an invisible line had been crossed forever. When I stepped into the hallway moments later, wrapped in my robe, I saw his shadow glide along the wall toward his room. I went into the living room, my heart still racing. He was already there, sitting on the sofa, a book open on his lap, as if nothing had happened. I knew the silk of my robe clung to my damp skin, knew I looked desirable. He glanced up, and for a long moment, our eyes met. No words were needed. We now shared a secret. I sat down opposite him, feeling his gaze on me, different now, deeper. He was looking at me as if seeing me for the very first time. Is everything all right? I asked, my voice a strained attempt at casual. He slowly closed his book, placing it on the table beside him. He nodded. Yeti, he said, everything is all right. But there was a timbre in his voice that sent a shiver down my spine. A long, drawn-out silence fell between us. I fidgeted with the glass of water in my hands, unable to hold his gaze for more than a few seconds. My mind replayed the steam, his silhouette, the searing knowledge that he had been standing right outside the door. Suddenly, he spoke again, his voice low and serious. You shouldn't leave the bathroom door open. My heart stuttered. I swallowed hard. It was an accident, I lied, knowing he could see right through me. His eyes, so calm and perceptive, held mine. It didn't seem like one, he replied. His tone held no judgment, no surprise, only a simple statement of fact. The silence returned, denser this time, vibrating with unspoken things. I realized my hands were shaking. To hide it, I stood and pretended to adjust the pillows on the sofa. As I leaned over, I found myself impossibly close to him. I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Then, I felt the light, firm touch of his hand on my waist. I didn't pull away. I let the contact linger for a heartbeat longer than necessary, and that was enough to ignite the air between us. He slowly raised his hand, as if afraid of startling me, and his fingers brushed the back of my own. It was a simple, almost innocent gesture, but it carried such an incredible weight that I forgot to breathe. I looked up at him, and in that look, I understood. There was no going back, not for either of us. The night that followed was an agony of wakefulness. I tossed and turned, sleep, an impossible stranger. The memory of his touch, the weight of his gaze, it all pulsed against my skin, as if he'd left a tangible, invisible mark. I replayed every second of our conversation, every silent acknowledgement. The quiet, orderly world of my home, my refuge, had been shattered. In its place, something new was rising, strange, terrifying, and utterly alluring. The next day was not awkward, as I had feared. It was electric, with unspoken anticipation. I made coffee. I checked my emails. I tried to pretend it was any other morning. But every rustle in the apartment, every step in the hall, the creak of his chair in the dining room, it all hummed with a new energy. Even the air felt denser, charged with the unspoken thing between us. I found him at noon, sitting in the living room with a newspaper. Sunlight streamed through the window, mapping the lines on his face, the geography of a long life. As I walked past, our hands brushed again. This time, neither of us pulled away. It was a fleeting moment, but the invisible thread between us vibrated with the contact. Yesterday, he began, his voice low. Then he hesitated, as if unsure how to continue. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at him. Yes, I whispered, my voice barely there. Yesterday. A silence followed, so thick you could feel it. He slowly reached out and took my wrist. His fingers, large and strong, were surprisingly gentle. My body seemed to make the decision for me, and I leaned in until our faces were inches apart. I could feel his breath, warm and steady. My own lips trembled. He closed the remaining distance. The kiss was unhurried. There was no rush, no greed. It was slow, tender, filled with all the secrets we had kept, all the words we had never said. It was a kiss that stretched into an eternity, so profound that for a moment I forgot everything. The years between us, the world outside, what was right, what was wrong. When we finally drew apart, my cheeks were burning. He looked at me with a gentle, calm confidence. This shouldn't have happened, I breathed. He stroked my cheek with his thumb, his gaze unwavering. But it did, he said, with complete serenity. We sat there, in the quiet, pressed close together. And in that moment, I knew there was truly no way back. The apartment, once my sanctuary, was now our shared world. That kiss had changed everything. The hallways, the kitchen, the living room, they were no longer just rooms. They were our accomplices. After that day on the sofa, everything in our small world inside the Gomel apartment was redefined. The living room became an archive of memory. Every time I passed the sofa, I could feel the ghost of his hands on my waist, recall the weight of him leaning toward me, hear the echo of a silence that would never be innocent again. He changed too. He moved through the house with a new, quiet confidence, the bearer of our undeniable secret. And I, instead of waiting, found myself seeking. A new, silent game began, played in long glances and orchestrated encounters. If I was cooking, he would find a reason to enter the kitchen. If I heard him in the hall, I would open my door just for the chance to meet his gaze. It was all subtle, almost imperceptible, but desire pulled us forward with a relentless gravity. One morning, as I stood at the stove making coffee, I felt his presence right behind me. He said nothing, simply stood so close. His breath warmed the back of my neck. Shivers traced down my spine. I turned slowly, and our lips met again, this time against the cool marble of the countertop. Another time, it was the hallway. I stepped out of the bathroom, wrapped only in a towel, and ran squarely into him. We stood frozen, looking at each other in the silent corridor. Without a thought, I leaned back against the wall, and he raised a hand to gently cup my cheek before bending to kiss me. It was brief, but so intense that the towel slipped from my shoulder, and the air crackled with a tension that made us both hold our breath. Even the balcony, where I hung the laundry, became a secret refuge. He came out to help me with the sheets one day, and as the wind whipped the white fabric between us, our hands touched, reaching for the same corner. No one could see us from the street, but the thrilling sense of the forbidden made the moment burn all the hotter. It felt as if the entire apartment conspired with us. Every doorway, every corner was a silent witness to a desire that could no longer be contained. Our entire story had unfolded behind these walls. They were our shield, our accomplices, but we both knew we couldn't hide forever. The suggestion came one morning over coffee. "We should go out," he said calmly. "We can't hide in here forever." My heart leaped. The idea was both terrifying and alluring. I pictured the stares, the whispers, the overt surprise of strangers seeing a woman of 30 with a man of 75. The age difference, which felt so insignificant within these walls, would become a vast, uncrossable chasm out there. "I don't know if I'm ready," I whispered. He took my hand. His fingers, large and warm, were a grounding force. "It isn't about being ready," he said softly. "It's about accepting who we are." Together. 2 days later, we stepped outside. It was a bright Sunday, and Gomel was alive with people. My legs felt weak as we descended the stairs, but his steps were steady and sure. The moment we were on the street, I felt the eyes on us. An elderly couple stared with open disapproval. Two passing teenagers exchanged a look and a quiet giggle. A woman walking her dog gave me a long, searching glance. I dropped my gaze, my cheeks on fire. Every step felt like a new challenge, but he walked with his head held high, a quiet dignity that seemed to deflect their judgment. His calm began to seep into me. Hesitantly, I took his arm, then squeezed it tighter, drawing strength from the contact. We walked down the main street, past shop windows and crowded cafes. We ordered coffee and sat on a summer terrace, the city's noise a buffer around us. But I still felt the stares. Every time a head turned in our direction, a knot tightened in my stomach. "Don't look at them," he murmured, his voice close to my ear. Look at me. I did as he said, and in his eyes I found everything I needed: calm, tenderness, and a certainty that dissolved my fears. For the first time, I felt a surge of pride to be by his side, no matter who was watching. When we returned home and the door clicked shut behind us, I realized what a monumental step we had taken. We were now bound not only by our secret life, but by our shared defiance. I turned and wrapped my arms around him. Thank you, I said, my voice thick with emotion, for not letting go of my hand. I never will, he replied. And I knew that despite the whispers and the prejudice, our story was just beginning. The echoes of our walk through Gomel came quickly. It was naive to think such a thing could remain a secret in a city like ours. The whispers began to seep through the cracks of our private world. The first sign was a call from my sister, her tone deliberately casual. I heard you were seen around town with some older man. Who is he? She asked, her curiosity barely veiled. I tried to deflect with a joke, but her skeptical laugh and the parting shot, well, people are talking, left me cold. I told Ivan Ivanovitch about it over a quiet dinner. He listened calmly, chewing slowly before he spoke. It was inevitable, he said. The question is not what they will say. It is what you will do when their suspicion becomes certainty. His words were a premonition. Sooner or later, I would have to face my family, and their judgment would be the hardest test of all. The day came when my mother called, her voice leaving no room for excuses. Come for Sunday dinner, she said, and bring him with you. She didn't say his name, but we both knew. The invitation was a summons. I felt as if I were marching to my own execution. Ivan Ivanovitch remained a pillar of calm. Do you want me to go? He asked, and in his voice was the same strength that had guided me through the city streets. Of course, I said, though my heart was pounding. The dinner was a minefield of unspoken accusations. My sister's raised eyebrow when we walked in. My brother lowering his gaze to hide a smirk. My mother's brittle politeness. We sat at a table laden with food, but the air was too thick to breathe, let alone eat. My sister broke the silence first. Anya, she said, her voice sharp, are you actually serious about this? I swallowed. Yes, I answered, my voice clear. My brother snorted. He could be your grandfather. Then my mother set her fork down with a sharp clatter. Her voice was as hard as stone. You are 30 years old. You are young. You are beautiful, with your whole life ahead of you. What are you doing with a man of 75? What will people say about this family? I looked at Ivan Ivanovitch, desperate for an anchor. He took my hand from where it rested on the table, enveloping it in his own. His touch was that same calm strength. He met my mother's gaze without flinching. She is not with a 75-year-old man, he said, his voice even and firm. She is with me, the person I am, not the number of my years. A heavy silence fell. My mother finally sighed and turned to the window, her back to us. I just don't want you to suffer, she said to the glass. People are cruel. Life will not be easy for you if you choose a path no one understands. Tears welled in my eyes, but with them came an unexpected surge of resolve. I would rather suffer for a choice that is my own, I said, my voice steady, than live a happy life that doesn't belong to me. My sister just shook her head. My brother muttered something under his breath. No one touched their food again. The tension was unbearable. When we finally left, I felt a strange mixture of shame and liberation. For the first time, I had spoken my truth aloud to the people whose opinions I feared most. There was no going back. As we reached our own front door, Ivan Ivanovitch pulled me into a hug right there in the hallway, ignoring the possibility of watching neighbors. His embrace was solid, a promise, and in that moment, I knew we had chosen our world and we would face the other one together. They know the truth now, he whispered, but that isn't the hardest part. The hardest part is for you to truly believe in us. His words were my anchor in the storm. We returned to the sanctuary of our apartment, a refuge that now felt infinitely precious. We had survived the battle. I poured him a glass of water as he sank into his armchair, his hands resting heavily on the worn fabric. His gaze remained calm, but a deep, unfamiliar exhaustion had settled in his eyes. Suddenly, a tremor ran through his hand. He reached for the glass, but his fingers refused to obey. It slipped from his grasp, shattering on the floor. A low groan escaped him, and his body began to sag, as if every ounce of strength had been stolen from him in an instant. He slumped in the chair, the color draining from his face. His hands, those huge hands that had always been my symbol of strength, hung uselessly at his sides. I rushed towards him, shouting his name.